Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is episode number 111, and we are talking about pastoral transitions with our guest, Matt Davis, who oversees an organization by that very name, Pastoral Transitions. One thing I want to say before we cut to this interview, pastoring is a unique industry, if you will, a unique profession. I would contend that much of the time, pastors leave ministry far unhealthier than how they joined ministry, if that makes sense. We start better than we finish much of the time. And that's kind of what Matt is focused on with his organization, Pastoral Transition, is to come alongside of pastors and churches in those seasons of change when a pastor is needing to move on to a new season of ministry that might take them out of normal vocational pastoral ministry. Matt has a story of his own transition out of pastoral ministry from a vocational standpoint, and now has an organization that is helping other pastors. One of the big things you'll hear in this conversation is us talking about the whole identity piece, how we as pastors really struggle sometimes with our identity apart from the work that we do as pastors. And I really feel like this covers our audience well at EntrePastors, because that's a big theme we see many of our clients dealing with is it okay for me to be out in the marketplace as an entrepreneur as well as in the church, doing pastoral ministry? Can those two things coexist? Or again, is it okay for me to leave this vocational, traditional pastoral ministry altogether and go pursue a ministry that looks a lot more like an entrepreneurial business in the marketplace? And regardless of what your situation is, I want you to know there is a path forward for you, and it can be healthy. And I think you're going to pick up on that in this conversation that me and my co-host Les Hughes had recently with Matt Davis. So without any further ado, check out this interview and be blessed. Here we go. Well, Matt, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the EntrePastors podcast, man. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so you are part of an organization called Pastoral Transitions, and we're going to have a conversation all around that. Why don't we start by just getting a 30,000-foot overview of what is Pastoral Transitions? What is your organization? And I think I can take a few guesses based on the title, but tell us a little bit about the group that you're a part of.
Yeah, you know that on-ramp to ministry when we're bringing somebody in that's new, it's very prayerful. The elders are a part of it. There's been a search committee, and then there's the moment where we bring them in, and it's almost like they've been knighted, right? There's prayer, and it's a beautiful moment. But that off-ramp of letting somebody go and taking them out of ministry is oftentimes not so holy, not so sacred. Sometimes it feels a little bit more HR. Sometimes it feels a little bit more legal, and it's don't let the door hit you on the way. So while most organizations are asking the question, what's next for our church or for our nonprofit, we decided let's ask the question, what is next for that outgoing pastor and their family, and how do we support them along the way?
So let me ask the next question. How do you support them along the way? What is let's get more into the nuts and bolts of the work that you do. If I'm a pastor that has been abruptly let go for whatever reason from my church, where do you guys come in?
Yeah, and there are different kinds, right? Some of these are planned successions, but oftentimes I find that we're working with and talking to pastors that were blindsided, right? The rest of the church knew, or the elder board knew, but they didn't know, and so they come to us. It really feels like the rug's been pulled out from underneath them, and they're trying to ask the question, what am I going to do with my life now that I'm not a pastor? And so sometimes that is a existential crisis for them, and they're trying to figure out, what am I going to do for work? How do I start to afford this life? And not that we were making all that much as a pastor to begin with, but we're helping in the areas of career, in coaching, and in counseling. And all of those have their different aspects that can really just kind of really build out, and there's a lot to it. But how do you figure out, like, what is that? When I came out of ministry, I didn't know what LinkedIn was, and I really was at one church for a long time. And so, my resume was not that deep other than like the pizza job that I had as a teenager. So what do we do? How do we equip them? And what do you do financially? Financial coaching. And you don't have a 401k, you might have a 403b. And what do you do with that? Life and leadership coaching. And then there's the really the spiritual formation aspect of where is God at for you in this season, and how are you doing? How's your soul? How's your relationship with your spouse? How are your kids and your family doing? Because oftentimes when a pastor is coming out of ministry, it's not just like losing a job and I'm going to go find the next job. It really is changing everything. It's changing your community. It's changing where your kids might go to school. You might have to move. And so we're trying to look holistically and comprehensively at all of those different parts of a transition.
Very good. There's so many directions I want to go with this, but maybe tell us, how did this all get started? And was this your idea? Are you at the genesis of this, or did you come along and support something that was already in motion? How did all of this get started?
Yeah. So while I was one of the people that founded Pastoral Transitions, this was not my idea. In fact, I ran from it in the very beginning. This is basically the birth of the triage that I went through in my own coming out of ministry. So I was a teaching pastor and an executive pastor at a larger mega church in Southern California, and I earned my way out of ministry, and that means that it was a difficult transition, and it really came to a point with my heart, with my soul, that this was not the right spot for me to be in. And there was some work I needed to do on myself in our marriage. And so as I was let go of ministry, out of ministry, and really working with guys who, I'd been there for 22 years, the elder board, the staff, even the senior pastor was my best friend for a long, long time. We really wanted things to go well. We intended on things going well, but I would say that as the process went on, it became more and more difficult, and the pain and coming out of community was really difficult. So what do you do with that? And how do you actually navigate some of those transitions? So I just kind of triaged and figured out, like, all right, well, I'm going to go down to this place over here to try and learn some career skills. And I'm going to try to start networking. And what am I supposed to do now? And how do we actually work through all of this? Well, fast forward about a year later, the guy that I founded this with, Bill Tom, was really in the marketplace for 35 years and was working in executive search, was working with a lot of different people. But one group of people that came into him more often than not was ex-pastors. And he would have these ex-pastors coming in and telling these really awful stories of what had happened in their faith communities and how they were hurting. And they were looking for a new job. And he was a career coach and he was helping with search. And so he would listen to these stories, hear the stories, and he would just weep with them. And he's very empathy oriented, and he just, his heart broke. Well, he said, is there anything that I can do to help? How do I help this whole community? Is there anybody out there? Is there a ministry doing it? And after searching, he found out that there was nothing. And he ended up talking to a friend of his who happened to be the chairman of the elder board, said, hey, you should talk to Matt. That didn't go all that great, but he lived to tell about it. And so Bill and I put our heads together, and we really developed and came up with this idea of let's focus on departing pastors, their families, and how we can help them into their next season and help them to thrive.
Now, obviously, you work with pastors. Do you do any work with church leadership teams, boards, that sort of thing, in helping through some of those transitions from the church side?
Yeah, and that's really where the whole conversation starts. And we do have quite a few pastors that are us months later, even 30 years later, and wanting to, like, I still have this like brokenness that needs healing. Oftentimes what happens and how engagement works is that the church leadership, and not just churches, but we're working with like Christian nonprofits and Christian businesses and Christian higher ed, But as they are contemplating and thinking about an upcoming transition, they would contact us and we would work with them and consult with them to be able to figure out, how do we message this? How do we do this well? And it actually bodes much better for the congregation, for them to be able to say from the front, we're making a change on our staff, and we love this person, and we want you to know, as a result of this, we want to let you know that we're contracting with an organization called Pastoral Transitions, and they will, for the next 6 months, walk through this transition season with this pastor, with their spouse, with their family, to help them as they're going through. And what that does is it helps people who, as they're listening to this announcement, that want to start lighting their torches and like stomping to the front of the pulpit, really angry, because they might be losing somebody. They don't have access to all of the information as to the why. We're able to diffuse a little bit of that and disarm a little bit of that, to be able to say, we actually do really care about this person. So how do we make sure that we're messaging this well? Because we'll work with pastors and they'll say, well, this is the reason they told me I got let go. And while I 95% believe that that is reason, there's also this lingering 5% that I don't think that they are telling me. And
Yeah.
that's the part that creates the angst for them. And so we're trying to help these communities be honest in a very loving and gracious way. We believe that you can do these ministry transitions with love and grace. And so how do we actually have these good, honest conversations, make sure that our communication streams to the person they're being let go, to the remaining staff, and to the congregation, that everybody's on the same page, and that this is a community effort. If we are really, truly called to be known by our love, then we got to do this differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, there's so many directions I want to go with this, but I'll describe this as far as our community goes, and then maybe I'll let you take it in whatever direction you want to go. So here's some pressure on you. But so here's the thing. At EntrePastors, we are serving pastors who in many cases feel overworked and underpaid. They're already kind of doing a ton in their pastoral ministry context. The money doesn't really show that. They're not being paid an above average salary by any stretch of the imagination. And so there's a desire to do better financially for their family. But it's not just a money problem. Like there's an identity thing here too. And this is where I think I want to direct the conversation a little bit. So we've got pastors who our solution is let's help you start a business or figure out what your skill set is that can be taken to the marketplace. And again, that's a whole nother subject. Like you already touched on that. Like there's some of that career training or some of those skills that either a pastor feels they're lacking or they need to be shown, look, those same skill sets you've been using in ministry are valid. We just have to, repackage how those are utilized out in the marketplace. So that's our audience. We have some pastors, I'd say a large number are bivocational. So they still are in, the full-time ministry role in terms of pastoring. They're not wanting to leave that. But there's a struggle as far as, is it even okay for me to be out in the marketplace? So that's one segment of our community. And then I think we have others. I know we have others that if they were truthful, they would say, I don't want to be a pastor anymore. Like I'm not even liking this anymore. It's draining the absolute life from my soul, but I don't know where else to go. And so that's where I feel like when I heard a little bit about your story and your organization, I was like, well, there's definitely some tie and we can have a conversation around all of this stuff. So talk to that pastor that struggles with identity. Like, who am I if I'm not a pastor? Or, if I'm a pastor, but I can't make it financially just as a pastor and therefore have to go out into this icky marketplace and do business. What does that mean about who I am as a pastor? Like, what would you say to that pastor, or what do you say to pastors that are really struggling with that identity piece of like, now that this is not a part of my life, who am I?
Yeah, I've never thought about any of that at all whatsoever. I'm just
Right,
kidding.
right.
There's a framework that fell into my lap during my transition season that I feel like has been really helpful. If you asked me 10 years ago, so tell me about yourself, Matt, I would say, well, I'm a pastor, and I, tell you something about my wife and my kids. But really, that pastor piece was my identity. And there's a guy named Brad Lomenick, and he talks about this framework of identity, assignment, and calling. identity, assignment, and calling. And this became really important for me. And he said, identity is who you are. It's knowing that you are the beloved of God. It's the message that I've preached 100 times, especially at youth camps. It's what we all know to be intrinsically true, but doesn't matter how many times you teach it. You really have to experience and believe it, right? So that identity piece for me was not in place. My identity was that I was a pastor. Your assignment, he quotes and says that the average male will have 11.4 assignments over the course of their life. 11.4 jobs is what he's really saying. And the average female will have 10.4 because she might be having babies for some of that period of time. So over the course of an average male's life, 11, 12 jobs. And then your calling, he would define as it could be somewhere around 5 or 6 times over the course of your life. It's something big that God is calling you to. Hey, Noah, I want you to go build this ark. Abraham, I want you to leave this place, and I have another land set up for you. So for me, getting those things straight, because I did not get those straight, honestly, before I left ministry, vocationally, I was really trying to do some repair work. So the first piece was really understanding and cementing in and believing that my identity was grounded in my sonship as a son of Jesus, and I'm part of the beloved, right? But that assignment piece was, well, so what do I do with this? And then what is my calling? And so if you asked me beforehand 10 years ago, you said, who are you? What are you doing in this world? I would say that my identity and my calling, both of those were that I was a pastor.
Hmm.
And I would tell you today that really me being a pastor was an assignment. It was a job, and that God is calling me to something else. And I believe that what God is calling me to in this season is a ministry of reconciliation. And now that I'm still in process on the believing that God loves me just for me and not for what I can do for him and all of those other pieces. That framework has been really helpful for me to be able to look at. I just think we get confused. And I've talked to a lot of guys who are in that retirement season, and they say, well, if I retire and I'm not a pastor anymore, well, what's my calling in my life? Like, what else am I going to do? So I find that this framework has been really helpful for us to be able to have a better conversation about, well, what bucket does that kind of fall into?
On the career side of things, when we can help a pastor through and maybe we haven't even helped them through the identity stuff because they're like, I still got to make money. I just lost my one paycheck or the only paycheck I had.
Right.
Take me into some of those conversations that you're having with pastors, or what are some of the things you're seeing when a pastor comes to you? They're like, man, I went to seminary for this. I've been doing this for 15, 25 years, whatever the case may be. I don't know anything else other than church world. How do you coach them, or how do you speak into their life around that thought process?
Yeah. And that's where I would say Bill does a really good job because of his background in the career space. But what we're doing is we are looking at, and we have some assessments and some tools that we're using with them to just assess what are your skills and what are even spiritual gifts, and looking at those through the lens of going into the marketplace. We're working on stuff like a 360-degree review. How do you get some feedback from some of the other things? Because a lot of times these strength tests that we're taking, we're the ones taking the test, we're the ones writing the answers, but it might be actually more helpful to have some of these other people that are giving us some feedback about ourselves that we might have some blind spots on. What does that process look like to write a resume? And how do we take some of these pieces? I realized, but it took me a long time. I realized that I actually had some transferable skills, right? As a pastor, you have an ability to communicate, and you have some empathy. You have an ability to be able to. I was writing emails for the church, and didn't realize that. Oh, well, that's kind of like marketing, right? And really, evangelism is good marketing. And how do we actually proclaim? We're proclaiming the gospel, but we can actually do that within a corporate context as well. So understanding that, we have a blog that's up that's really like, how do you explore and looking at some of those different vocations after your ministry life, and how did those actually go through? So it's really connecting some of those pieces. And then there's also some things though that we actually need to learn. Like I did not ever look at a P&L, like profit loss report, until later on. I sat in a couple of elder board meetings and like, what is this thing with all these numbers? I'm a pastor. I don't know what I'm looking at. That's, for the business guy. And so there are some things I didn't know what a CRM was, and I had to figure out, so there is a process of learning, but there is this wealth of material that you already have that can be transferred into a new career.
Matt, could you talk some about trends that you're seeing? I mean, we've been through some paradigm shifts in the last few years that have accelerated some trends and processes that have been going on for a while, but it's a little more noticeable now. So, by trends, what I'm referring to is, people that it's anecdotal, or maybe you have some general stats, but the people that you talk with, you know, does it seem as though a majority or a good bit are saying, you know what, I'm done. Let's talk marketplace. Or are there still a lot, even though they've been burned, that want to stay in some sort of vocational ministry position of some sort? Or what are some of the trends that you're seeing, young versus old guys or ladies?
Yeah. So I would say, the Barna statistic that kind of fuels a little bit of this. We're not trying to get people out of the church, right? I'm not trying to get pastors to leave their ministry and then go work in the world, in the marketplace. But the statistic that Barna puts out is that 42% of pastors are thinking about quitting ministry. And why is that? And that number is up significantly over the last few years. And I think that COVID was not nice to pastors in ministry. You have everything from, are you going to wear masks or not? Or what is your stance on, politics? Yeah, I think pastors long for the day when people were complaining about the temperature in the worship center and the volume of the music. But we're dealing with social justice issues, and we're dealing with all these. And I think the church has to have a voice in all of that. But the trend that we see is, man, this is just tiring, and I'm not sure that the return is worth it, from a soul perspective. And so that would be one trend that we're seeing. And then I also see a trend. And it's been there for a while, but we have pastors that are nearing retirement, whether they are a founding pastor or whether they have gone through and they have been in the church world for years and years. They're getting to that point. They might be in their upper 50s, lower 60s, and they are asking themselves, if I don't do this, what am I going to do? I don't have enough money in the bank right now to be able to retire. And is my family going to live under a bridge? And so how is that life going to work out for me? And oftentimes I think you guys get this probably more than most. We're not setting our pastors up financially to thrive and to succeed. Where there's a very dependent relationship between pastors who are wanting to retire or move on to something, but they'll stay in their position 2 years too long, 5 years too long, and they're also missing out on bringing that next generation up. There's somebody in the wings that's waiting for them to be able to, hey, move on to whatever that next plan is. But I think that we're just scared to move on. Those are the two trends that we see probably more often than not.
That's good. One thing I want to just double down on, this isn't really a question, it's more of a statement to what you said, because we would be right there with you. We are not, as EntrePastors, as a platform, we are not trying to get people out of the church either. We're not trying to get pastors to quit. Our whole thing is championing pastors in the workplace, either because they need to for financial reasons or because they want to, like because they have the capacity and they go, I'm more than just a pastor. Like I have this desire. I can't explain it, but I want to be in the marketplace. And, it's not lost on us how many times we have guests on our show, pastors who are doing something in the marketplace where we hear this refrain of, I'm getting more ministry opportunities out in the marketplace than I ever did just sitting inside the four walls of my church building. I don't know why that's such an epiphany to us. It's like, yeah, that's where people are. They're actually out in the marketplace, not in your church office. Anyway, we just want to champion that. And for the pastor who says, I don't want to pastor anymore, and I just want to go, work a job or create some jobs somewhere in the marketplace, we want them to be healthy. I think that's really where your organization and ours would share a strong heartbeat on that together. Like, I want this to be healthy. I'm so tired of seeing pastors give and give and give and pour out their life in pastoral ministry, and then just hit an absolute wall of destruction for themselves, for their family, and have the whole thing go down in flames. Like, that story is told way too many times, and there's got to be a healthier transition from one season of ministry into another one. So again, we often talk about I left ministry, and we throw those words around, but I don't really believe we left ministry. I mean, I think we just changed the season of what that ministry looked like for us.
Or who your employer is.
Oh, go.
Yeah.
Or who your employer is. Ministry's not confined to who I'm getting a W-2 from.
Yeah. And I found that coming out of that, there's a certain part of my heart, I think, that was shut down to even exploring the possibility of starting something outside of ministry, because it nobody ever thinks of asking, like, well, hey, what if I'm not fully full-time here all of the time, even though I'm giving like 60, 70 hours a week? What if I pull some of this back so I can go explore something else? There's a fear of failure because you're just a pastor. What are you doing starting a business for? But coming out of ministry, I'm, just a couple years out of all of this, but I have, number one, way too many domains that I've bought off GoDaddy just because I have ideas and I got to go buy a domain. I wonder if anyone's thought about this, and then I go buy it. But I also have 4 businesses, 4 companies. I have, S Corps, an LLC, and even a 501c3. So I found that, like, there's something inside of me that loves to create, and I can see a ministry context and application for each and every one of the things that I'm starting and I'm doing. And then it's really kind of cool, because then you have multiple revenue streams that are coming in through that.
Yes. Man, I love that. Tell us briefly, we won't go too deep into the weeds on that, but what are some of your other LLCs? What are some of the other interests or ideas or whatever that you're pursuing? What gets you excited when you think about launching something, whether it's a for-profit business or whether it's a nonprofit? What are you working on?
When I came out, I was trying to really figure out what I was going to do. And ministry was not, going back into vocational ministry as a pastor was not one of the options for me. And I did everything from a really bad state-run kind of Uber. I was basically bringing older folks to get their dialysis treatments and homeless people to methadone clinics, which was a really great and humbling season. Or going to work the graveyard shift at Amazon, or working in election. So I had a season where I was just floundering and really trying to figure out what I was going to do. But really the spark was joining StoryBrand with Donald Miller. I'd always read his books, and this whole concept and idea of telling a good story. I've always been a storyteller, right? And I think that as a pastor, you get to tell the greatest story ever told. And really what I loved about it was, how do we actually take this story and all of the framework, the parts of a story, and then apply it to a business setting? And so I realized, like, I kind of have a knack. I really love messaging. And so I've sat down with, man, I can't tell you anything from lots of ministries, some really big ministries that we would all have heard of, that I'm behind the scenes and I'm writing websites for them and creating stuff for them, to working with Bloomberg, to working with some brands that, everybody's heard, to like really weird, like, energy consumption HVAC companies that would just kill my soul. But I still loved being part of that. So StoryBrand, and even just getting to work with Donald Miller with some of those pieces, has really, that would be my main assignment. That is how I make money. And that frees me up to be able to do some of these other ministries, right? So we have that piece. We have Pastoral Transitions, which is really a ministry and outpouring. It's a heart project. It's a passion of ours. I started a nonprofit with my dad. My background is I'm Jewish. And so we started a ministry called The Jewish Road. And we're really trying to, again, part of my calling is to bring reconciliation, not only between churches and outgoing pastors, but between the church and the Jewish people. And this is a very biblical, thing. So I've led almost 30 tours to Israel, and we're going into churches and we're doing Passover Seders and speaking on how do we bring these two people together, and Act 1 and Act 2 of the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. And I even just started a brand new LLC that is more of a gag gift, and it's more fun. And actually, out of all the things I do, this one might actually be the thing that will make me some money. So it'll be a lot of fun, and I can't reveal it just yet.
You can't tell us about it? Well, when you can, I want to hear about it, man. Now
Yeah.
I'm leaning
Yep.
in. Ah, I want to hear what the thing is, but all right, I won't push you for it. So
Yeah.
just put it in the chat. No one, I won't tell anyone else. Just put it in the chat. See it there.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. I'll show you later.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, this has been awesome, Matt. Like, I appreciate the work that you're doing. One thing, too, going way back in the conversation, I'll just throw this out there because I want pastors to hear this. You know this because you've experienced it. I've lived it from a little bit different angle. I bet, Les, you have maybe, because I know you've transitioned from, a couple different seasons of pastoral ministry as well. But I don't mean this to sound negative to our audience. I just want you to hear the reality is this. When your time in pastoral leadership is done, regardless of the why behind the transition, whether it was your choice to, I think my time here is done, I'm stepping down, or whether you got let go, blindsided, whatever, here's what you'll experience is that 98.7% of your people, you will never hear from them again. People that you have poured your heart, soul, and life into, the minute you're gone as their pastor, you're kind of out of their life. And it's not that they don't love you. It's not that they're bad people. What's my point? My point is that sometimes I think in pastoral ministry, we give so much of ourselves to people who at the end of the day, they're not giving that back. And I don't want you to take that as a negative thing. Don't go blow up your board meeting today or, be mean to Gladys when you call on her in the nursing home. But keep it in proper perspective. Matt, I'll let you respond to that, or Les, either one. You all can push back on that. But I after 17 years of leading a church that I had planted, my wife and I led for that long, great church, great people, man, when it was our time to be done, we stepped out, we heard from almost nobody. And again, I wasn't fired. There was no like super negativity around me being done. It's just like, whoa, where did that community go? So you're in a weird spot when you're in that lead role, man. And not everybody is maybe as with you as you thought they were. So,
well, and if that's a
pushback.
That's it's not really a pushback. I'd just add an appendix to it. And the appendix would be that you still fulfill your assignment. You still love the Lord and love people with everything that you have. I mean, none of that changes, but that fact that you just stated, what it does impact is, let's see, among other things, what it does impact, it ought to take away any sort of anxiety or pressure or burden or feelings of guilt that people in ministry have, that they can't always be everything to everybody. And so the fact is, most of the time, those hard choices don't need to be made because you've got a large enough bandwidth to go ahead and meet healthy expectations of people around you. But at the point where those expectations may become unhealthy, you don't beat yourself up over that, because what you just said is really true. And so it's a matter of saying, at the end of when this journey gets close to being over, there's a very small group of people that are going to be right there with me.
Yep.
And they're the ones that deserve that extra, that place, that role that really only you can fill. My wife and I have had those conversations where if I leave an assignment for some reason, that church, that ministry will replace me with little, they may say with a little bit of effort, but they will replace me. Now my wife Paige might say the same thing, but I don't think so. I think it would take her a little longer and a little more effort to replace me if the Lord were to call me home today. So that's a little bit longer way of saying what you just said, John. But that the thing that you just said is factually true.
Yeah.
And I would add on to that. It's something that I call the Uriah complex. It's a little bit like, we're with you, we're going to be with you, and you kind of run out into the next season of your life, and you turn around and say, why is everybody still back there? Where did everybody go? Right. Yeah. And so a uniqueness of my coming out of ministry was that the church wanted our family to stay at the church while they wanted this to be a holistic reconciliation process, and which was really, really hard for us. But I remember a couple months into that process, there was a guy that came up to us after church, came up to me and said, Pastor, I don't know what you've done, but I'm sure as hell glad that the elders don't know all the things that I've done, because they would have kicked me out a long time ago.
Mm.
And you just realize that on the outskirts of things, that people, these are the people that are coming up to you after the message and high-fiving, and this is great, or they're complaining about the air conditioning. But whatever that is, that our people are watching. They're watching how we love each other. They're watching how we deal with each other. And I think that it pushes our people either into a performance where I have to be really good and on top of it, or it pushes them into hiding and protection. And so how do we actually love each other well for the season that God has us together? And I think one of the things I learned in the season was that we have friends for reasons, we have friends for seasons, and then you have friends for a lifetime. And so some of that, like, abandonment that you might feel, it feels like the wind has been sucked out of your life, and you realize, like, man, and it's not just the people, but it's the people on staff. It's the people that you mentored and you poured yourself in, that you had levels of vulnerability, and you thought, man, I thought that, I was there for them in that really hard
Yep.
season. And now that I'm gone and out of there, I thought that there would be more. And so
Yeah.
there's things to be mourned in that transition season for sure.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Matt, before we run out of time, I want to make sure that we let people know that probably around the time that we're releasing this conversation, you are working on a podcast. So it may be out at the time of this release, or if not, it'll be very soon coming. Tell us a little bit about the podcast project that you guys are getting ready to roll out.
Yeah. So it's called Life After Ministry. And I'm doing this with my wife. And the question that I was asking early on was, is there actually life after ministry? And if there is it any good? And not only have I found that there is indeed life after ministry, but there's also ministry after vocational ministry. And this is a little bit of the journey and the season. So my wife is going to join me because I'm so thankful. We're together. We love each other. Our kids are there in the home, and we're making it. And there is life after ministry. And so we're going to be talking to some people who've come out and lived to tell about it. We want to hear some of the things, and because I think when you come out of it, the people that we talk to most of the time are just low on hope. They are scared. They're not sure what's going to happen. And I was looking for any voice that would help me in that season, and just really have not found. There's a lot of people talking about this. We talk a lot about succession and maybe some of the exchange there, but after that person is let go or there's something new, really it's all about the new person or what's happening next with the church. And
Right.
that it's almost like the VH1, where are they now? Right? Like, what happened to that guy that used to be here, that used to stand up front all the time? So we want to be able to have a space where we could say, hey, go listen to some stories of hope. We're going to also bring in some of our friends and partners that we work with that will give some really great tools and some help along the way. And so that's the Life After Ministry podcast. And we have a Facebook group called Life After Ministry. And it's really meant to be a place where we can help facilitate and build a community to resource one another in that space, in that time.
Well, I love that, man, and I wish you well with that podcast. I would encourage our audience to go give it a listen, even if you yourself, pastor, are not there yet. Like, other pastors, right? I mean, we know people who probably would benefit from something like that, and someday you will be there. Whether, again, like, we're all interim pastors on some level. The day is coming that you will not be the pastor of your church, whether it comes abruptly and you get hit by a bus, or again, other ways that our seasons come to an end, but it's happening. So I love that you're focusing on this, because I think for far too long, we've not done pastoral transitions very well and very healthy. There's not been a real healthy off-ramp for men and women serving in those roles. And so, again, from our side, we want to champion pastors to go, look, there's still ministry, and it's okay if you're getting paid out in the marketplace to do that ministry. It just looks very different than what we were told ministry is and what it looks like. So anyway, Matt, if someone wanted to connect with you and reach out, like, what's the best way? Where would you encourage our audience to go connect with you online?
Yeah, we have a website, pastoraltransitions.com. And you can also just shoot me an email, matt@pastoraltransitions.com. But we're pretty easily accessible. And it's always going to be a confidential call. It's we know that it's a scary and transitional time to even just put your name in a form or to send that email, because it kind of makes things real. But these are confidential conversations, and even just to be able to feel things out and say, what would it look like, or how would I do this? If I even wanted to initiate this with my church, what would that look like? And so we have some ways of being able to help and some tools to be able to walk in that journey.
Very good. Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure, man. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you for coming on and sharing your story and more about pastoral transition. So we wish you well as you continue to grow that out and build that, and can't wait to hear what this new LLC is you're working on. So please email me and let me know. I'm very curious.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.